You got to have a different accent.
I'm going live, by the way. So.
Oh, by the
Y'all
way,
just keep talking.
look at them.
I'm telling you, you say we're going live, and they'll move away.
Hi, Larry.
Yeah.
Keep walking, you do not get comfortable. I want to thank you. After class, we go home with their mama. I need her. They don't need it.
I don't think they need it at all.
You don't know, you don't need coffee.
That's like big red at mine.
Songs and towers. How are you?
Still got company?
No.
You did.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
Don't worry, no, I got it. Legend still, right?
Water works.
Robert?
Thank you, Mark.
Don't you wave at me no more. You didn't wave at me. Wave at me like with the whole bag right. 4 times already. One time I said, he's taking business too long with pride.
Them people don't wait at all.
Not at all.
That's my fault, I think. Was that my fault? It might have been mine.
And then, you gonna go with the breach?
Well, I have that on the. Are you laughing at me on
Yeah, I'll bring it around.
There's just some guy.
It was amazing, but I'll bring it home.
You too, Frank. Who did anybody? How big is that one?
I will get it to you.
All right, we're going to get started pretty soon. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11, which is page 851. We're going to continue in that chapter. We'll try to stay there for most of the time. Try to stay there. I don't know that we'll be successful or not, but I hope you're doing well. Man, it's summer already. I don't know about y'all, but my goodness, I'm ready for the pool to open. These kids, they need it. No, man. All right. So last week we talked about, do you remember who we talked about last week? We talked about Abel,
Noah.
Enoch, and Noah.
Yeah,
Yep,
Noah,
Abel and
Enoch,
Cain, Enoch, and Noah. So this week we're going to be moving along in our chapter, and we're going to talk about a very important figure in the story of faith and in the story of the Hebrew people, and it's a very important. Remember, this letter that was written, the letter to the Hebrews, was written to people who were struggling, to people who were asking a question of, why God? And I think it's relevant for people today because people today still are asking the question, why God? And so the story of Abraham is a story that helps maybe not answer completely why God, but helps give us some information in those and helps us to walk in faith in the why God moments. So, Hebrews chapter 11, And the story of Abraham, or the retelling of the story of Abraham, begins in verse 8, which is at the bottom of the page. If you got one of those blue Bibles, that is page 851. I mean, it's the last verse on the page. And so we're going to be turning a page here pretty quick. So, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. And we will go through, oh man. Man, we're going to have to go all the way to verse 19. So hang with me. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in a promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father, because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, when Abraham was tested, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It's through Isaac your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Whew. That's a really quick telling of a lot of chapters in the book of Genesis, and a really important story. But what I want you to think about. So what we've been talking about is living a faith that would be remembered, because that's what happens, right? The Hebrew writer is grabbing these stories of people who lived by faith, and their faith caused them to act. So by faith, Abel offered, and by faith, Noah built, and by faith, Abraham obeyed and went, and by faith, he believed the promises, and by faith he offered Isaac. By faith, his faith was active, and it caused him to do things because he believed what he was saying. Do you remember what we talked about? We talked about what's the definition of faith. It's right here in the beginning of the chapter, verse 1. What is the definition of faith?
Evidence of things not seen.
Okay, sir.
Evidence of things.
Okay, evidence of the things not seen.
Being sure of what we hope.
Being sure for what we hope for. Okay, hope is a very important word when we talk about faith. All right? Because what did the Hebrew writer say? He said that verse 13. Somebody read for me verse 13. Just that one verse.
All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were
Aliens? Foreigners. Yeah.
and strangers on earth.
Oh.
People.
All right. We'll stop there.
Okay.
So, they were still living by faith when they died. So faith is a journey, and hope is what allows you to make the journey. What are you hoping for? Have you ever thought about that? What is our hope in? What are the things that it, and I'm gonna just kind of summarize some answers that people say sometimes. Sometimes we say our hope is heaven, and that's okay. And other times people will say, well, our hope is this or our hope is that. But you've you've experienced life enough to realize that life gets hard sometimes. And talking about heaven is great, but sometimes it doesn't help me in the present. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, does that make sense? That the present still is hard. So faith is focusing on the promise, not the present. That's good enough to write down. That's kind of our one of our main points tonight. Is faith is focusing on the promise, not the present. Um, so what do I mean when I say faith is focusing on the promise, not the present? What's that mean? To focus on the promise, not the present.
Okay, the promise isn't necessarily in the present, it could be in the future.
Okay. The promise may not be yet, but it may be in the future. Okay. Well, what does it mean to focus on the promise and not the present? What about in Abraham's case?
He hadn't seen it yet.
He hadn't seen it yet. All right, check this out. I'm going to do a little repeat after me. It comes right out of it. The version that I'm reading from, which is the same version as some of y'all. I'm reading from the NIV. But in verse 8, so by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, what does it say? He obeyed and went. Now I want you to pay attention. Right after it says he obeyed and went. It's kind of a neat way to remember it. So just repeat after me. Ready? Even though he did not know.
he did not know.
Even though
Even though
he did not know.
he did not know.
That's faith. Okay? You can stop repeating. That's faith. That's faith. That attitude of even though he didn't know. Faith is a focus on the promise instead of only the present. So many times we focus on the present, on our present circumstance, on our present situation, on the present state of the world or the country or the county or the city or our neighborhood. We focus on what we can see and what we can feel and what we hear. But what about the promise of God? Because when Abraham was called to go to a place that would be his inheritance, did he totally understand what God was doing? No, he didn't. And so here's another point. Full obedience doesn't require total understanding. Because he obeyed and went, didn't he? He fully followed God without totally understanding what that future was. Faith is focusing on the promise. That's what I'm talking about right there. That is what faith is. So let's think about this for a second. Let's let the Bible, not that we don't allow it to be real, but let's just kind of think about this for a second. So Abraham, he's old enough to be a grandpa when God calls him. Like when people say his name, his before God changed his name was Abram. You know what the name Abram means? Father or dad. You know how that must have hurt? He didn't have any children yet, did he? And God says, I'm going to go give you an inheritance. Who's he going to give it to? Abram struggles with that even as you read through the account in the book of Genesis. He's like, I'm going to have to give it to one of my hired hands. They're going to get my inheritance. Now, God changes his name from Abram to Abraham. And I was trying to think of like what's a modern equivalent of what Abraham, from Abram, which means father or dad, to Abraham. And I just kind of started laughing, and I thought, a modern equivalent would be something like Pappy, because it's like the father of many. Because I think of when I think of Pappy, I think of Steve Hen. I mean, that's what his grandkids call him. And I think of, he's got Steve and Trixie have kids, and then their kids have kids. And so he's not just the father of his biological children, he's the father of the in-laws that they've married and their children also. And as life goes on, he will be the father of more and more and more. He will be Pappy. And that's kind of what God says about Abram. And then when he calls him Abraham, but has Abraham had any children when God changes his name? No. Let's focus on a promise, not the present. But he struggles, right? Because and Sarah struggles. I mean, how old's Sarah? Old enough to be a grandma? I mean, when Sarah has her child, everyone would say that's impossible. The Hebrew writer says they were as good as dead. That's how old they are. I don't know who introduces himself like that. Now, I do remember when my great-grandmother, she lived to be 103. And I remember when she turned 95, I was an adult. And I learned to crochet. I can't do it very well, but I crocheted her a scarf. And I remember I gave her the scarf, and she was very gracious, even though it was terrible. And she said, I just don't know why I'm here anymore, Matt. And that, to me, is about as close as as I think about this, as when the Hebrew writer says he was as good as dead. Like, why is he still around? But God calls him. And we could focus on the present where he doesn't have any children. We could focus on the present where he's living as a stranger and a foreigner. We could focus on the present where he's in the land but hasn't conquered the land. Or we can focus on the promise. Now, how's God get Abraham to change his focus? What's he do? Come outside for a second, is what he says. I'm paraphrasing. But he says, come outside. And the Hebrew writer even grabs a little bit of that story. Look at verse 12. Chapter 11, verse 12. Somebody read that.
And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand in the seashore.
Okay, so have you ever been like way out in the country? Where there's not a lot of city lights, or when the power goes out at night. This is a great thing to do if it's not storming, is to go outside and look up. Have you ever done that when it's really, really dark? Or you go to the mountains. Anybody ever been to the mountains and looked up at the sky, and the air is really clear, and you can just it's like the stars. Oh my goodness. It's like they're innumerable, right? And you think God created all of that. And what's that do? Well, for me, what that does is just, I go, wow, God is awesome. And wow, I'm really small. And God tells Abram, look at the stars and count them if you think you can. And what's God saying to Abraham? How powerful am I? Right? He's asking Abram, how powerful am I? Now, has Abram received the promise yet? When God says, how powerful am I? No. But faith is fueled by hope. That's the second point tonight. Faith is fueled by hope. And that's important to think about, what do we put our hope in, or what do we trust in? Now, some people will trust in money, and they'll put all of their trust in, or they will say, I will be happy if I have a certain number in my bank account. Have you known anybody? Have you ever felt that way? Oh, forgive me for thinking this way, but if I just win the lotto, I'll be happy. Well, I'm pretty miserable. Maybe before the lotto, I'm probably apt to be pretty miserable. Now I might be miserable with more things. I'll be happy if. What have you heard some people say things like that? What do you think? I want to hear from you. What are some things that people seek happiness from that really doesn't provide happiness? What have you heard or you experienced? Yeah? I'll be happy if my family would just get along. I'm not saying that families getting along is a bad thing. I'll be happy if I'm healthy.
This headache will go away.
I'll be happy if this headache, if my present, right? If my present will get better, I'll be happy. But what are we focused on? Are we focused on the present, or are we focused on the promise? Our faith, is it fueled by hope? Because when we talk about hope, and we talk about the things that we hope for, that, oh my goodness, all these people were still living by faith when they died. Are we living by faith? Like we sing a song, don't we? I'm in my head. I'm already, living by faith. But are we living by faith? What would it look like? What would it look like? What would your day look like if God gives you tomorrow? What would your day look like if you started the day living by faith and continued in that day living by faith? Would it look different? Would you be focused on different things? Would your mind be focused on different things? Would you do different things? Because by faith they did things. Right? Verse 15, I want you to look at verse 15. If they've been thinking about, okay, I want to put something up here. So somebody read verse 15.
If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return.
Go ahead and read verse 16 too, Michelle.
Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared
All right. So I want you to see something here. So if they had been, what did Michelle read? If they had been doing what?
Thinking of the country.
Thinking. Why does he start here? Why does he start with, if they'd been thinking about, if Abram had been thinking about Ur of the Chaldees, where he came from, he would have had opportunity to do that. So why does the Hebrew writer talk about their thinking?
Misuse of the verse, but as a man thinks in his heart, so is he.
Okay, so the idea of
Your thoughts motivate you.
your thoughts motivate you. Okay, so when Paul writes, I don't have the page number for this, so I apologize. But somebody go grab Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. I might have it marked in my Bible, so let me see. It'll be around page 833. 832. See, it's right around there. Thank you, Stefan. So Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 and 9. Okay? When you get there, read it.
Finally, brothers, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is honorable, whatsoever is just, whatsoever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.
Okay, hold on before we get to the next verse. What are we supposed to do about those things? If there's anything that's good, let's just sum it up in those words. Anything good, we're supposed to do what first? Think about it. Okay.
What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things.
Okay, so now we're doing what? We heard something, we're thinking something, we're putting into practice. So my thoughts become actions, and my actions become habits. So if I don't like my habits, where should I start? My stinking thinking. You know? What if you focus on things that are not true? Just do the antithesis of what Paul said. Things that aren't true, things that are false. What if we don't think about things that are noble? What about we think things that are in the gutter? What if we think about not things that are right, but things that are wrong? What if we don't think about things that are pure, we think about things that are filthy? What's going to happen with our actions? Our thinking is going to lead our actions, and our actions is going to lead our habits, and our habits are going to lead to a lifestyle. Yeah? Yes, sir.
God's own mouth, he said, the thoughts of their hearts were only evil continually.
So, the thoughts of their hearts were continually evil. So, how does God change us? Come back to Hebrews 11. That's page 851. How does God change us? By faith, yes. Faith that focuses on the promise, not the present. Faith that's fueled by hope. God changes us by saying, "Hey, step outside your current dwelling place for just a moment and look at the sky and see the stars and see how great I am." Now, have you ever, and we live in a great part of the world for this, have you ever just like been driving or walking or outside and just, the sunset, like all the different, have you ever seen that? There's just the different colors of the sky, and you're like, oh my lands, that's beautiful. Have you seen that? Or a sunrise? Man, we live in a pretty part of the country for that. You know it? We don't have any of those trees in the way. We really appreciate sunrises and sunsets. We appreciate the canopy of the stars at night. We appreciate the power in a thunderstorm. I just want to remind us of the God we serve. That even though Abraham was as good as dead, could God deliver on his promise? Did God deliver on his promise? So for people who are asking the question, why God? They're going through a hard time. They've been scattered all over the world because of persecution, because of hardship. They're asking the question, why God is this happening? Is God big enough to deliver on his promise? Now, in the present, does that mean everything's going to be okay? No, it may be very difficult. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they all lived as foreigners in their inheritance. Oh, but what Abraham do? You remember what Abraham did? He focused on the present a little bit, got himself into a little bit of a mess. He lied about who he was, about who Sarah was. He tried to come up with a shortcut, try to help God out, right? On his promise, he tried to help God out, so he took the handmaiden and had a child that way. So what's a lesson for us? Are we living by faith? Are we really and truly living by faith? What does it mean to live by faith in our current day and age? In Crosbyton, Texas, what does it mean to live by faith? Do we trust God's promises enough to live by his principles? What are God's principles that he asks us to live by? What do you think? Give me some help. What are God's principles that he calls us to live by?
Love him with all your heart, soul, and mind.
Okay, so the greatest commandment, right? Commandments. Love God and love others, right? On this, all the law and the prophets hang, Jesus says. So do we love God with all of ourself? Not just part of ourself, but all of ourself. Do we love God with all of ourself? And the way that's evidenced is how do we love other people who are made in his image? Okay? So how do we live out the principles of God? That was excellent. Do we trust God with our money? With the way he tells us to handle our money? Do we trust God with our family? And the way he talks about marriage, and the way he talks about parents, and the way he talks about children? Do we trust God in the principles that he lays out for us in that? Do we trust God with our community? The way we interact with other people? When we get upset, are we focused on the present or the promise? Does that make sense? Because when I get upset, you know what I'm focused on? The present. Presently, I'm really frustrated, and I want to act it out in a way that's ungodly. But if I focus on the promise, and I focus on God's principles that he tells me to live by, then in my anger, I don't sin. That's what Jesus said, right? In your anger, do not sin. All right. I want you to see how it started and where they got. Okay, so verse 8. Where did it start? By faith, God called Abraham. And he did what? He obeyed and he went. And we said, what was that? What was those words we said together? We repeated, even though he did not know. All right, so that's where it started, right? So even though he didn't know, he obeyed and he went. And it was decades later when verse 17 happened. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, did what? Offered Isaac as a sacrifice. You read the Genesis account of this story, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. So I'm going to sum it up. Abraham and Isaac and Abraham's servant are there. And God tells Abraham to go offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Abraham knows, Isaac doesn't. And so they're about to head off to the place where Abraham is supposed to go do this. And they gather up the wood for the sacrifice, and they get the knife for the sacrifice, and they get a fire because the sacrifice is a burnt offering. And so they have the fire, and Abraham says to the servant, we, meaning Abraham and Isaac, are going to go worship. And we are going to return. Did you hear it? What did God tell Abraham to go do? Sacrifice Isaac. Does that mean that Isaac is going to be alive during the sacrifice? No. But God's been walking with Abraham so that he's focused on the promise, not the present. His heart's breaking about what he's about to have to do. I'm positive. But he says to his servant, me and Isaac are going to go make a sacrifice. And me and Isaac are going to return. And so they head off, and Isaac says to his dad, we have the wood, we have the knife, we have the fire. But what about the sacrifice? And do you remember what Abraham tells Isaac? God will provide. Jehovah Jireh. If you ever heard the song Jehovah Jireh, that's what that song is. God will provide. And so on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Now here's the crazy thing. So they go up to the mountain, and Isaac is not a young boy. He's likely an older teen, or maybe even in his 20s or 30s. So strong. Could have resisted, but submits to his dad. He lets him lay him on the altar, on top of that pile of wood. And as Abraham is getting the knife, and he's about to sacrifice his son, what's God say? Don't touch him! And then over in the thicket, there's this ram that's caught. And Abraham goes and gets the ram, and they sacrifice the ram, and they make their sacrifice. And I don't know if it's the exact same spot, but it's really close to where Jesus was crucified. Really close. On the mountain of the Lord, it'll be provided. Are we living by faith? One of the things about living by faith is it's focused on the promise, not the present. Another thing about living by faith is it's fueled by hope. The last thing about living by faith is it's freeing. It's freeing. On the mountain of the Lord, it's provided. God's sacrifice is enough. I wonder, just that we don't have this in the Bible, so I don't know. But I want to let your imagination run a little wild here. Abraham and Isaac make the sacrifice. And they start heading back to the servant. What do you think that trip was like? You think there were some tears? You think there was some laughter? You think an old man was really happy? I think so. God carried him that far, and he didn't drop him. God's carried you this far. and He doesn't intend on dropping you. Are we living by faith? Do we focus on the promise of God, and do we live the principles that He calls us to live? Or are we living by our own principles? Because our own principles are, I'll love you if you love me. If you don't love me, I'm going to be mean to you. Because that's what you get what you deserve. Right? It's reciprocal. If you lie about me, I'm going to lie about you. If you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you more. If you scare me, I'm going to be scarier to you. We live in this world. We talked like for 2 years about the kingdom of Jesus and how it's a different kind of kingdom. But the kingdom of this world is this world that is like, it's about climbing up this ladder and about pushing people down. It's about treating people as though they are objects and instruments to be used. That's the kingdom of this world. The kingdom of Jesus, it's treating people as though they are children of God, as if they were created in His very image, just as you were, because they are. And how would we treat Jesus if He were in that circumstance with us? Because Jesus said, I was hungry, and you did what? You fed me. I didn't have clothes, and you clothed me. I was in prison or in the hospital, and you came and you visited me. And they said, when did we see you in prison or in the hospital or hungry or thirsty or needing clothes? And Jesus says, whatever you've done for these my brothers, you've also done for me. You see, why did those people feed people? Why did they clothe people? Why did they visit people? Because their faith was active. They were living by faith. That was one of the things that the early church was known for, was living out their faith. They would be kind to people that no one else would be kind to. They created a whole different kind of kingdom that people weren't used to, where people who were high class were associated with people who were of low class, who were associated with people who had no class. Because here, there is no Greek or Jew, barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free. Because Christ is all and is in all. So, if God calls us to wander, will we wander? Or will we just wonder about wandering? I got a friend, he has this saying, 3 frogs sat on a log. One decided to jump off. How many frogs are on the log? 3. He just decided to jump off. He didn't do it.
Oh, wow.
And we need to decide to put our faith into action. We need to put our faith into action, not just decide to put our faith. Does that make sense? That when we talk about these principles that God calls us to live by, we talk about feeding the hungry, we talk about clothing those that need clothes, we talk about visiting people who are lonely, we talk about being kind to the stranger, when we talk about making a difference in our world, God put you here on purpose and for purpose. And don't think that just because you seem insignificant or it seems impossible that God can't use you. It seemed impossible for Abraham to be a father, even though that's what his name meant. That seemed impossible. But was it impossible for God? No, not impossible for God. So let's focus on the promise. Let's be fueled by hope, and let's be freed by faith. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you that we can look at the life of Abraham, that we can be encouraged, that people for centuries have looked at the life of Abraham and Sarah and have been encouraged and have been drawn to a deeper friendship and relationship with you, that have put their faith into action, that they didn't just make a decision, they did something about it. God, we love you and we thank you. And it's in Jesus' precious and his powerful name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank y'all.